Welcome, viewers, to the Inside Interviews podcast, which is an enlightening series, academic discussions, where we take a deeper dive on a variety of unique topics. After this episode, please be sure to check out the previous episodes on our website, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. Today, we are very pleased to have Dr. Farah Kawtharani. She is an expert in Middle Eastern politics and history with a PhD in Middle Eastern politics from McGill University. She has previously been assistant professor of Arabic and Islamic studies at the University of Michigan, Dearborn, and a visiting scholar at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. Today, we will be discussing her book entitled Political Thought in Contemporary Shi'a Islam, which focuses on the thoughts and contributions of Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin. I'll begin with a few of my thoughts on this book, which is basically, I found it to be a real breath of fresh air. It's profoundly interesting because it speaks about somebody who very little is known about in academic literature, that is Sheikh Mahdi Shamsuddin. And especially in light of the current geopolitics and looking at how 12er Shi'is have grappled and interpreted and negotiated with the idea that an imam is in hiding or an imam is in occultation, in ghaiba, and how Sheikh Mahdi Shamsuddin deals with this in light of current social, economic, and political conditions that when he lived, that is. How do Shia scholars negotiate all these forces of secularism, the nation state, liberalism, post-colonial world, a post-1979 Iranian Revolution, a world after the Iranian Revolution, and then the fact that Shia are a minority. People like Sheikh Mahdi drew upon the tradition to do so and was a distinguished scholar in his own right. It also gives us an insight into how a jurist and a theologian attempts to make religion and the teachings of the Quran and the Imams in his based on his learning, relevant through his own intellectual pursuit in the modern world. And I really think Sheikh Mahdi is a great example to that, or example of that. And today we have an expert on him, his life, his literary output, Dr. Kawtharani, who's with us today. Let's get right into it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Vinay. It's my pleasure to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about Sheikh Mahdi Shamsuddin, his childhood, a little bit about his intellectual upbringing or the influences that would be pivotal to what he would achieve later on, or his contributions in Lebanon and abroad.
Yes, so let's start with the beginning. So Sheikh Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin comes from a family of ulama in South Lebanon. And he was born and raised in Najaf, where his father, Sheikh Abdul Karim Shamsuddin, was studying in the Hawza, the seminaries of the Najaf. And so in his biography, we know that his father decided to return to Lebanon when Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin was 12 years old. And so Sheikh Muhammad decides to stay on his own in Najaf to pursue his studies at the Hawza. And so he stays in the Hawzas, and he describes the conditions of how it was, how Najaf was in these times. So he was born in the 1930s. We're talking here about the 40s and the 1950s in Najaf. And he describes the environment to have been very conservative, where when the young ulama, when they're being trained in the Hawza, they were not permitted to read even newspapers or to listen to the radio by the senior ulama, because this was seen as bringing Western influences, so secularizations, ideas of unbelief, apostasy. So he describes it as a very conservative environment, and he says the only entertainment that they had at that time was reading Arabic literature, Arabic novels from Egypt, for example, if they were able to have it. So and this is a time where the Arab world not only Iraq, was going through major political turmoil. So there is the rise of Arab nationalism in Egypt, especially. And then there's also the proliferation and the spreading of secular ideologies in Arab societies, including Iraq and including Najaf there. So this is the political environment in which they were living. At the same time, the religious establishment of the seminaries, the houses in Najaf was very conservative in the sense that they were very quietistic and very apolitical, and they were not encouraging the younger ulama to be engaged politically with all the political affairs and changes that were taking place in Najaf, in Iraq, and also by extension in the Arab world. So this is the social political environment where Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin was with his colleagues, again, other jurists who are very important and who will play an important role in Shi'i politics later on. So, on one hand, we have political turmoil, fundamental political changes, and then the conservative senior ulama that are not encouraging the younger ulama to engage with what's going on. And so there was a rise of secularization that was introduced by ideologies of Marxism, and also the rise of the Communist Party in Iraq, that was one of the most important communist parties in the Arab world, and it was attracting many young Shia to join it. So Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin, with the other ulama, realized that there were real threats against Islam and Islamic education in this environment. So the young people are being attracted to Marxism, joining the Communist Party, and they felt that the institution of the Najaf was not grappling and engaging very well with these changes. And what made things worse at that time is the military coup that brought to power General Qasim. He was not friendly with the Shia religious establishment. He introduced many secularizing laws in Iraq, especially in the area of family law, and also made changes in the agrarian. Changed the kind of reformed the agrarian laws, which affected the sources of funding for the seminaries. So Qasim coming to ruling Iraq through that military coup created an environment that was not friendly for the religious seminary. So we have, on one hand, we have secularization forces, and then we have the spreading of the Communist Party, but also a government that is not friendly and making changes that are not in favor of the independence of the religious establishment. And so this is really the early influences on Sheikh Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin and his colleagues. And so they had to respond to all these changes and also to these threats that threatened the religious authorities in the Najaf, but also kind of reduce the impact of Islam in the public space. And so at that time, the Shia establishment in the Najaf responded in two ways. So the first way, the first initiative that they took, and this was mostly by the more senior ulama than Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin. And I also want to mention that Shamsuddin was trained by the most important marja in al-Najaf. So we're talking about Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim and Sayyid al-Qasim al-Khou'i. And he received his ijaza from Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim, and then he was appointed in an Iraqi city called Diwaniya as the representative of Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim. Going back to this environment that we just talked about, two initiatives were taken by the seminaries, by the houses in the Najaf. The first one was the foundation of Jam'iyyat Ulama al-Najaf, so the Society of the Najaf Ulama. And so this initiative was more educational, more theological, more pedagogical. It was not involved in any political action, but the goal of it was to reach out to young Muslims and young Shia Muslims and try to bring them back to Islam, or to make them to introduce an idea of a more engaged Islam with public affairs, and give them an Islamic perspective on all these issues that they were grappling with, like political changes, economic changes, but also to offer them an Islamic vision that could counter the effects of Marxism and secularization. So bring Islam to the younger people and bring these younger people to Islam again. And so what the Society of Ulama al-Najaf, what the society, so what they did is launch a magazine called Al-Adwa al-Islamiyya. So this magazine was, the editor in chief was Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, who later on founded Dawah Party in 1958. And he was, of all the younger ulama in the Najaf, he was the most politically engaged alim. And he was a prolific writer, and he produced many books on Islam as a public system that could counter Marxism, and it has its own political vision and its own economic vision. So Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin was very involved in Majalat al-Adwa. So he was member of the Society of the Najaf Ulama and a contributor to Majalat al-Adwa. And he wrote, so in this magazine, in which also Sayyid Fadlallah also contributed to. They focused very much on presenting this vision of Islam that can give answers to Muslims on political issues and on economic issues. So that was the first initiative. Society of the Najaf Ulama. The second initiative was launched exactly by Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. This is when he founded Hizb al-Dawah, so the Dawah political party, and that was the first Shia Islamic political party to be launched. And the purpose of it was that it wasn't enough to be writing and reaching out to younger Muslims. Ulama had to be engaged and involved directly in politics to be able to counter all these threats that we just talked about, like the secularization of the new regime in Iraq, and also the impact of the Communist Party and the Marxist ideology that was very popular in Iraq at that time, and also in other Arab countries like Lebanon also. We'll talk about this later. A very strong Communist Party that was attracting specifically Shia young people. And another thing to mention about the environment in which Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin was living is that all his colleagues were very gifted ulama who were politically involved in major ways. So we talked about Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, but there was also Sayyid Musa al-Sadr, who left Najaf and went to Lebanon many years before Fadlallah and Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin left Najaf, and went and established himself in Lebanon. And he is going to play a very important role in the mobilization of the Shia, intellectually and politically. And we'll talk about that later. But so Musa al-Sadr and Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin had met in Najaf. And he had met also with Fadlallah, Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. And another important figure worth mentioning is the son of Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim, so Muhammad Baqir al-Hakim, who later on would be persecuted by the Ba'ath regime. And then once he was able to leave Iraq, he would go to Iran and he would establish there the Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq, and return to Iraq after the fall of Saddam Hussein. And he got assassinated there. So this is to give an idea about the politically engaged and active environment in which Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin found himself. And to conclude this section, I would say that these young ulama woke up on so much political turmoil that was threatening Islam, and they felt that the senior ulama were not doing enough to engage, so to bring back, to counter the negative effect of all these ideologies. And so that's why they took it upon themselves to go and to starting political parties or starting an Islamic movement that is going to counter all the negative effects of what was going on around them, secularization, Marxism, and all of that. Another thing is, so things got much worse than the coup that the regime of Abdul Karim Qasim. So I just wanted to mention the conditions that led Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin to leave Najaf and Iraq and go back to Lebanon. So in 1963, things become worse for the Shia establishment because there is another military coup that brings General Arif to power, who was very sympathetic with the Ba'ath and with the Ba'ath ideology. And this is when they start openly harassing the Shia establishment of Najaf. So cutting the sources of funding, interfering with the Khumus management, and harassing the ulama, arresting them. And this kept deteriorating until the Ba'ath came to power in 1968. And when the ulama here were openly persecuted by this regime, and it became known that the Shia ulama, who were not Iraqi, so of Iranian descent, of Lebanese or Lebanese descent, they were not welcome in Iraq there. And they were going to be arrested, tortured, killed. So this is when Iraq became very unsafe for the ulama, especially if they were not Iraqi ulama. And this is when Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin left in 1969 and went back to Lebanon. It was his first visit to his ancestral homeland.
Wow, so he was born in Iraq.
Born and raised in Iraq.
Amazing. Then came to Lebanon. I didn't know that. That is fascinating. Okay. Yeah.
Very interesting. So yes, if it was not for the Ba'ath and the persecution of the Shia ulama and Shia society there, I think he would have stayed in Najaf and become one of the marja in Najaf. Yeah. I don't think he had plans to go to Lebanon. It's political conditions that.
Wow. And he was raised in the ranks of some very famous people you've mentioned. I mean, these are people who have contributed to the trajectory of 12-er Shi'ism in the 20th century. I mean, Al-Hakim, Fadlallah, Musa Sadr. I mean, these are not, I mean, these are people who monographs can be written or have been about each of them, multiple books.
It's fascinating environment for a Shia scholar to be there. So exposed to the best Islamic training that a Shia jurist can receive, but also exposed to so much political turmoil that is going to affect his scholarly output, but also the political positions and the political religious leadership that he's going to assume in Lebanon. So all of this prepared him to play the role that he's going to play in Lebanon. Him and his colleague, Muhammad Hussein Fadl.
So we know a lot about Sayyid Muhammad Fadlullah generally, just because there's a lot written on him, especially in fiqh and his political ideas. You know, I mean, I would say we, as in the people who are in the field of Islamic studies and particularly Shi'i studies, but Mahdi Shamsuddin, we rarely hear about this important personality. That he was side by side. Were they of similar age generation as well? Said Fadlullah.
Yes, born in the 1930s, both of them. Yes.
Were they friends? Let's go. Like, I'm really curious, like, about this relationship between the two of them, because then they both moved to Lebanon from Iraq. They're both from Junub. They from the south.
Yes.
But
so much
about Shamsuddin.
Yes. It's fascinating because in their own rights, both of them were very intellectually talented, very politically active, made a huge difference in the Shia scene in Lebanon. Actually, in the 1990s, in the intellectual scene in Lebanon, they were spoken of as the most dynamic religious intellectuals in this country, not only in the Shia scene, but like in comparison to other religious leaders, whether Islamic, Sunni, or Christian. So scholars in Lebanon would say that because of Fadlallah and because of Shamsuddin, the Shia religious scene in Lebanon is so dynamic because of their scholarship and their very original ideas. And so let's talk about, you asked if they were friends. Yeah. So they have so much similarities. From South Lebanon, born and raised in Najaf, trained by Sayyid al-Khoui and Sayyid Mohsen al-Hakim. Involved both of them with the initiatives of Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, except that Fadlallah was much closer to Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr and much more involved in the Dawah party, although he says that he never took an organizational role there, but intellectually, he was very close to the ideas of Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr and like the need for an Islamic political party that is going to counter effect the other secular political parties. Shamsuddin remained closer to the intellectual activism rather than the direct political activism and political action. So this is here the beginning of the differences between them. And then so we know that he was close to Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, but he was not embracing these ideas of an Islamic government openly the way Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr did and Fadlallah. And so both of them will leave Iraq because of the persecution that we spoke about and move to Lebanon at a time where Lebanon also was going through its own political turmoil and a lot of mobilizations. And we can talk about the Lebanese system and why it created all of these grievances and political action and activism. So they arrived to Lebanon. Fadlallah takes with him the ideas and the concept of the Dawah party, Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, and the idea of an Islamic government. Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin arrives to Lebanon three years later, and then from the beginning he collaborates very closely with the Sayyid Musa Sadr. And that was not the case of Muhammad Hussein Fadlallah. So we see here two, I'm gonna call them two tracks, like two different ways of looking at Lebanon. And so this is where the divergences start taking place between Sayyid Fadlallah and Sheikh Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin. So Sayyid Fadlallah arrives, and both of them are aware of the Shia grievances vis-a-vis the Lebanese state and the political system of Lebanon. And let me mention a bit, like here, explain a bit of what was going on with this political system. So it's a sectarian political system, and the political science literature refers to it as a consociational democracy in which power is divided between the various confessional sects. And in this division of power, the Christians, especially the Maronite Christians, have a hegemonic place. They dominate most of the power. So we're not talking about an equal division of power. We're talking about a system that privileges Christians more. And this is before we're talking about 1960s and 70s, before the Ta'if Agreement that introduced constitutional reforms. So this is the environment in which they arrive, and there is a lot of pro-Palestinian activism there. And the South Lebanon is threatened by all of this and by potential Israeli aggressions. The Palestinian leadership has already moved to Lebanon, and it was embraced by a large section of the Lebanese population, exactly the leftist movements, leftist politicians, powerful, who were very disgruntled about this system that they seen as unfair to all citizens in Lebanon, distributing power unequally, but at the same time being too right-wing, too conservative politically. So there is a very strong leftist movement in Lebanon that is pro-Palestinian. And so Fadlallah and Shamsuddin arrived in this context. Fadlallah is going to focus very much on launching an Islamic movement in Lebanon, similar to the ideas that he brings with him with the Dawah party. And many members of the Dawah party moved to Lebanon because they were Lebanese. They had to leave Iraq. For Shamsuddin, as I said, he collaborated with Musa Sadr, and Musa Sadr had done a lot of work in the last 10 years after he arrived to Lebanon. And that was, he was aware of the Shia grievances in this sectarian political system, and the fact that the Shia regions, for example, South Lebanon or eastern, the mountains on the Beqa, the eastern part of Lebanon, on the border of Syria, were underdeveloped because the government in Lebanon did not invest enough in developing these regions. And so there was lack of political representation for the Shia at a time where the Shia in Lebanon were very politically active, very intellectually engaged, educating themselves in the 1960s, and politically mobilized. And at the same time, they lack political representation. So this causes a lot of insatisfaction. So what Musa Sadr, like his project and his vision, which is very important for the Lebanese Shia, and it was, I think, very original and very useful for the Lebanese Shia, was not to defy the Lebanese sectarian system, but to work from within. That was the importance of his vision. So he advocated for the Shia, and he advocated for more rights to be given to the Shia, rather than to confront the political system and try to overthrow it or to institute an Islamic government in Lebanon. He, I think, in his own very intelligent vision from the beginning, he understood that this multi-religious environment in Lebanon is very enriching for the country. And another important thing, Lebanon, despite all the inequalities created by the sectarian system, still provided a free political environment. That was very important for someone who came from Iraq and had just experienced al-Ba'ath and all these military coups that led to the despotic regime of Saddam Hussein. So in Lebanon, it was different, and he saw the advantage of this freedom. That's why he thought it was possible to acquire rights, socioeconomic rights and political rights for the Shia in Lebanon, without confronting in a militant way this regime, working from within. And there were. It was fortunate that in Lebanon, people in the government, non-Shia, so Christians, politicians who were open to these initiatives by Musa Sadr. So they were not part of the right-wing hegemonic Maronite domination of the state. So they saw that these socioeconomic inequalities may create a lot of violence in the future. So it is important to work with leaders. If we have leaders like Musa Sadr, it is important to work with them and to start reforming the system. So this was his idea. Reform it, modify it, work a lot, like advocate for the Sharia to be able to gain more rights with them. And I think Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin, from the beginning, the moment he was associated to Musa Sadr, understood the importance of these ideas, and he embraced them. And for the rest of his political career, he would work on these themes and try to find an intellectual Islamic legal framework for these ideas. Fadlallah was on a different, in more of a different sphere. He was more interested in Islamic government. At the beginning, when he arrived with his associates in the Dawah party, they were not interested in reforming the system. They thought the system is oppressive, it is unfair, and we live in the 1960s, 70s. That was a revolution. These were revolutionary times in all of the Arab world. So rather than pursue the activism of Musa Sadr, he was more radical. He preferred to focus on a transnational Islamic movement and on working to, theoretically, if it is possible, to establish an Islamic government in Lebanon. They looked they were very untrusting of the Lebanese system. Unlike Musa Sadr and Shamsuddin, who were not, I'm not saying that they liked the system or anything, they were very aware of Shia grievances and they wanted to make something about it, but they did not want to take a revolutionary militant course. They preferred a civil course. So Fadlallah, when he arrived, he started building many foundations. So he was very active, very proactive, very dynamic, and he built many religious seminaries in which, we can talk about this later. But the founders, the founders of Hezbollah, or the first leaders of Hezbollah, would be trained in these seminaries that were founded by Fadlallah, and were the ideas of the Hizb al-Dawah and Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr were being taught, and again the ideas of Imam Khomeini, and so this was their project for Lebanon. At the same time, Shamsuddin was collaborating with Sayyid Musa Sadr on a different project. So we started by talking about the similarities between Sheikh Shamsuddin and Sayyid Fadlallah, and then I wanted to explain how they diverged. The differences, which started in Lebanon, and it started in their different views on the Lebanese state. So they had different views on the legitimacy of the Lebanese state. Fadlallah was not did not really subscribe to this idea that the Lebanese state is like that legitimate, that we have to work with it. But then, of course, he will change very much in the 1990s and the 2000s, and we can talk about that later. How it's a whole process, and he is going to change. But in the 1960s and 70s, this is how it was. So they had different views on the legitimacy of the Lebanese state, different views on the role of the Shia, the role of the Islamic movement in Lebanon, and then different views on the theory of Wilayat al-Faqih by Khomeini.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that just strikes me immediately from your discussion here, and especially from the book where you go into much more detail, is how dynamic 12er Shi'ism was at this time. I mean, I wouldn't say it isn't at this time, but now, but at that time, the 60s, 70s, 80s, I mean, there was just so much discussion. They come out of the same seminary, but they have different views, right? Which shows this internal dialogue and discussion within 12er Shi'ism, particularly within Arab 12er Shi'ism, is ongoing, right? And they have different views on how to deal with a multi-ethnic, multi-religious state like Lebanon, right? And what is the role of Shias vis-a-vis others within that state? Then comes up Hezbollah, right? This transnational movement influenced by Iran. And as you discuss in the book, Shamsuddin and Fadlallah had different attitudes towards Hezbollah.
Absolutely.
And this is very relevant today because it also gives us an idea that these movements were not necessarily monolithic in terms of how Shia ulama responded to them or were involved with them. Can you shed a little bit of light on particularly on the differences with regards to Hezbollah, its founding, and Fadlallah, and especially, of course, most importantly, Shamsuddin's view?
Yes, this aspect is very important to the Shia scene in Lebanon, also beyond in Iraq. So I don't want to talk. It's gonna take a long time if I talk about the rise of Hezbollah and how this came about. But we'll start with this point where I mentioned that the future leaders of Hezbollah were trained in the seminaries of Fadlallah, and so we can tell from the beginning there's a very close relationship between them. And the ideas, of course, an idea of an Islamic government in Lebanon was being discussed in these seminaries, and to what extent they were able to implement it, I think this is what they were discussing. That was their main concern. And of course, there is another very important component that gives rise to Hezbollah. Again, the the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. This is a very important aspect in the rise and the rising power of Hezbollah. So Fadlallah was close to them. He was never a member of Hezbollah. He never played a leadership role in Hezbollah, but he always thought, like later on, when he was interviewed, he would say that he was always there as a guide, as a friend, that he was always available for consultations with them, that they started with having very similar ideas that I talked about, and I don't want to talk about again, but like the Shia grievances, Lebanon, the sectarian system. Hezbollah, when it started, was at the beginning, now it's very different. At the beginning, they were totally opposed to the sectarian system, and they thought of it as very oppressive of Muslims and of the Shia, and it was not possible to reform it. It's better to overthrow it, and if it's possible to implement an Islamic government in Lebanon, so this is the course that they pursue. Now, they were close to each other. However, Fadlallah and Hezbollah, however, they're also going to there are many differences that are going to be erupt, and they're going to be distant from one from the other. Sayyid Fadlallah at that time, he was always a very charismatic figure, but in the 1980s and then later in the 1990s, this is where he became a very important religious leader for the Shia in Lebanon, but also beyond, because he had followers in the Arab world, even including Sunni followers who were very impressed by his ideas. So Fadlallah was growing as an intellectual figure, and he was very popular, very influential, and very charismatic. And he saw himself as a religious leader, giving religious guidance to Muslims who were seeking it, not only to the Shia, but very important. He was a very important figure for the Shia. And because of his growth, he ends up declaring his marja'iyya in 1995. And when he declared his marja'iyya, this is where the Iranian leadership, and so the institution of Wilayat al-Faqih and the supreme leader, did not see this favorably. And this is when he started being attacked by Iranian ulama, and his religious authority was being undermined by them. The Iranian regime, like the Iranian leadership, wanted to curb the religious authority of Sayyid Fadlallah, but they were not able to do it because he was so popular and he had such followers among the Shia in Lebanon that he remained a marja. But the effect of that was to distance him from Wilayat al-Faqih and from the Iranian leadership and from Hezbollah. And so he was so popular in the Shia circles in Lebanon that even the Shia who followed Hezbollah as political leadership, they looked to Sayyid Fadlallah for religious leadership. So Hezbollah and Wilayat al-Faqih in Iran were not seen as religious leaders. It is Sayyid Fadlallah who was seen as the religious leader. And so they would seek his legal opinions, not the legal opinions of the al-Wali al-Faqih, the guardian jurist in Iran. And so that's why he was able to perpetuate his leadership. And he became known as being a alim, a marja, who is very rationalist, very open-minded, very progressive actually on social issues, on scientific issues, giving legal opinions. And that was very important for the Shia in Lebanon, especially the young people. He played a very important role in making them understand that they could be fully pious, fully Muslims. At the same time, they did not have to reject modern lifestyle. And this is where he was distant from Hezbollah, but he never really, like, things never went bad between them. He never attacked them, or he never fully criticized Wilayat al-Faqih as Sheikh Mohammed Shamsuddin did, which we can talk about next. With Wilayat al-Faqih, Fadlallah and Wilayat al-Faqih, definitely he was supportive of, he was a keen supporter of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the leadership of Khomeini, and also the theory of Wilayat al-Faqih. But his idea was closer to that of Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. So Wilayat al-Faqih, but with the principle of shura, consultation. So yes, a qualified jurist can be at the head of the government, and so it's going to be an Islamic government. The qualified jurist has the right to be at the head of the Islamic government, but like which one? There are many qualified jurists. There is not only one. So this is where the idea of shura comes in, the consultation. And so for Fadlallah, it was, well, it doesn't have to be only one jurist. It could be a council of several jurists, experts on Islamic law, that the Ummah elects them. And so this is, if we are going to have a government of Wilayat al-Faqih, it doesn't have to be one. We cannot eradicate the authority of all the jurists. It will be a council. So this is where he differed with Hezbollah and differed with Wilayat al-Faqih. Now, Sheikh Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin had a different view than Fadlallah.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to get to that, because this, from what I gained, what I understood from your book is, and I would say this continues until today, there is an internal conversation within Shi'ism, 12er Shi'ism, about the role of Iran. Let's just, post-1979, things changed, right? There's exportation of this concept of singular, absolute religious leadership. Al-Wilayat al-Faqih al-Mutlaqa. It's absolute wilaya. One leader, they even call him, they gave this title, Wali al-Amr al-Muslimin. But that's not necessarily the case for everyone, clearly. And not all Shia accept that title, that this absolute transnational Shia identity led from Tehran. And clearly Sheikh Mehdi Shamsuddin was not of this view, and I don't think, certainly said most of his teachers, like Sayyid al-Hakim or Sayyid al-Khou'i, would have agreed with this concept. Although they're all dealing with the same tradition, with the Maqbula Umar ibn Hanzala, they're all relating to the same ahadith, but clearly interpreting them in very different ways. And what's so fascinating about the discussion in your book is, today, the perception is in Lebanon is Shia Iran, right? Shia follow Hezbollah majority. This is just what's in the popular opinion. And that is following Sayyid Ali Khamenei, who is the leader of Iran, right? And basically they just take orders from him, and things kind of move on. At least as it's perceived in the West, shall we say, in the Western media, but this is far from the reality. There is an rich internal discourse. It's not necessarily, I don't want to say animosity, but a rich internal intellectual, there's a plethora of intellectual differences that you bring up in this book. Can you shed a little bit of light? I think this is really important to explain, or maybe for the listeners to understand, and our colleagues to also to understand that this discourse and Mehdi Shamsuddin's clear disagreements with the Iranian model, while all remaining Shia, but clearly had his own views on this issue as to what is the role of a jurist during the occultation.
Yes, and this is very important in the intellectual and political journey of Sheikh Shamsuddin. So as you mentioned, he was trained they had all the same usuli training in the Najaf, and he was the student of two very important Maraja, Sayyid Khou'i and Sayyid Mohsen Hakim, who, as you said, would not have been would not have agreed with Khomeini on his theory with Wilayat al-Faqih, and would have believed that he has taken it too far. And so this is the idea that Shamsuddin is going to elaborate and theorize his critique of Wilayat al-Faqih. And there are two parts of his critique to Wilayat al-Faqih. One of them is legal, Shari'i, where he goes and criticizes the legal proofs that were put forth by Imam Khomeini to construct the theory of Wilayat al-Faqih, and you mentioned one of them, one very important proof tradition, Umar bin Hanzala. So he would go to great length in legally deconstructing the legal construction of Wilayat al-Faqih by Imam Khomeini. But there is also another critique of Wilayat al-Faqih that is very political and not legal. So yeah, two critiques. And so I will start with the political critique. So when at the beginning, Wilayat al-Faqih was a theory in the theoretical realm. So a theoretical exercise, intellectual exercise that the ulama were engaging in. But once Imam Khomeini triumphed in Iran and overthrew the rule of the Shah and established the Islamic government of the supreme guardian jurist, al-Wali al-Faqih, this is when things changed, because now there is political repercussions and ramifications on the Shia outside Iran, wherever there are Shia societies, but mostly in Iraq, because of all the very intellectual religious ties between Iraq and Iran and the close geography, and Lebanon by extension, where there is a large Shia community and it's very politicized, very mobilized, and the Shia in the Arabian Gulf. Kuwait is important, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and then, by extension, Pakistan and India. So we have all these societies where Wilayat al-Faqih, and by extension, the Iranian leadership, is going to have a lot of influence and ramifications. And so he was very worried about the repercussions of Wilayat al-Faqih on these Shia, non-Iranians. So the idea of Wilayat al-Faqih, Khomeini's idea, was that the supreme leader is not only the leader of the Iranians, but Shia by extension everywhere. And for Shamsuddin, this was going to create a very large problem for the Shia in their relationship to the nation states in which they were citizens. So loyalty, so Wilayat al-Faqih requires religious but also political loyalty to the supreme leader in Iran, to Imam Khomeini, or after him to Imam Khamenei. But then what do we do about the loyalty of these Shia citizens to their own states? And in Lebanon, this issue was mostly expressed fully in Lebanon, where Hezbollah was rising, and Hezbollah, there are many factors that led to the rise of Hezbollah. So part of it is local and organic. Another part was also because of so much patronage that came and support, logistical and financial support that came from Iran, but also the Lebanese Shia population embraced Hezbollah because of the resistance movement against Israeli occupation in South Lebanon. So there were so many factors that made Hezbollah be very powerful in Lebanon. And so Shamsuddin was very worried about what is this going to do to the Lebanese Shia and to the Iraqi Shia and to the Kuwaiti Shia if they start professing political loyalty to Iran, because they profess religious loyalty to Wilayat al-Faqih and they acknowledge the full authority of Wilayat al-Faqih on them. So this can create a lot of problems for the Shia in terms of their loyalty to their own countries. And we know that around 10 years ago, there were many Arab leaders who started questioning the loyalty of the Shia to their own state and seeing them as a Trojan horse, that they're inside to advance an Iranian agenda, and that their loyalties are to Iran, and they can play a very subversive role in Arab countries if they keep this loyalty to the Iran. So there was all these narratives, and Shamsuddin was aware from the 1990s, like the beginning of the 1990s or end of the 1980s, of these narratives, and he was warning against them. And so one of his main projects was to make sure that the Shia citizens remained loyal to their states in which they are citizens, in order to protect themselves, to protect their safety, and in order to avoid firing back from their states. And remember, he saw the persecution of Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath and the earlier regimes against the Shia, and how much they can destroy the Shia establishment, but also the Shia societies. Putting them in prison and torturing them. So this is very important in his background. And he saw that Lebanon, despite all of the inequalities and the problems that are created by the sectarian system, at least in Lebanon, there was no persecution of the Shia. They had full freedom. And we just spoke about Sayyid Fadlallah and how he had full freedom to build his seminaries, to train his students, to speak about Islamic government in Lebanon. Not once he was harassed by the Lebanese government or arrested because of that. He would be criticized by other political and intellectual players. There's nothing to be compared to the persecution that took place in Iraq. And so, again, to go back to the idea of why Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin was very wary and cautious and worried about the repercussions of Wilayat al-Faqih was exactly that he did not want to see the Shia endangered, and he didn't want them to fail in embracing their citizenship. At the same time, he was not naive at all. He wasn't thinking that he wasn't telling the Lebanese. Like, he was very critical about this discourse in Lebanon, about Lebanon being a haven for all these minorities coming there, and all of them are receiving all these protections, and everything is fine. They just need to collaborate and cooperate with each other. Everybody has every confessional group has its own culture, but as long as they cooperate with them, everything is fine. No, he understood that there were substantive inequalities, and there were very legitimate Shia grievances and other grievances, not only the Shia, other factions in Lebanon were grieving, and this system was not functioning well. But why overthrow this system when it is not as evil as that of Saddam Hussein of the past? Rather cooperate with it rather than overthrow it. And so all of these themes come together. Criticism of Wilayat al-Faqih, focusing on urging the Shia, mostly the Lebanese Shia, but all Shia and all the country societies in which they are, to be loyal to their own governments and to work for change within the government, for reforms, political reforms within the state by cooperating with the government, rather than to take a radical position and try to either establish a pro-Iranian Islamic government or be very loyal to Iran through a political party such as Hezbollah. And so I can now talk about his legal critique of Wilayat al-Faqih. But before that, I would like to mention the Shia Islamic Council and Majlis al-Islami Shi'i Al-A'la. Because this is very important for the political projects of Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin, and it fits very well with his arguments later on against Wilayat al-Faqih, but also what alternatives can be put in place. So with the Shia Islamic Council, this is a great achievement by Sayyid Musa. And so we spoke earlier about when he came to Lebanon, he wanted to advocate so much for political and socioeconomic rights for the Shia in order to mitigate the grievances and the marginalization that they were subjected to under the sectarian system. And so he engaged, Sayyid Musa Sadr engaged in so many foundations that he established, but the most important foundation that he established was the Shia Islamic Council. And so he advocated so much for that. And in 1969, I think, or 1967, the Shia, the Lebanese government, accepted to establish this Shia, the Islamic Shia Council. And so it was supposed to be an institution that advocate for rights for the Shia, but most importantly, to administer their religious affairs and to speak in the name of the Shia vis-a-vis the Lebanese state. Because in this sectarian system, every confessional group has its own body of a religious leadership. So the Sunnis have the office of the Mufti of Lebanon, with different other muftis in different regions. For the Christians, for the Maronites, they have this very large, important institution that is the Maronite Patriarchy. The Shia did not have that. They had their own religious Shari'i courts that addressed family law and succession, but these Shia religious courts were under the administration of the office of the Sunni Mufti. So the Shia did not have their own office that represent their represent them as a religious community, but also administer their religious affairs and advocated for them like the other confessional groups. And Sayyid Musa Sadr considered this to be this is a factor that was weakening the Shia and not allowing them to integrate better, and also to demand resources and funding and access to power from the Lebanese government. Just important to mention here that Sayyid Fadlallah was not on the same, was not in agreement with Musa Sadr about the Shia Islamic Council. As I said, I spoke about his ideas about an Islamic government, but he also said he was more interested in a transnational Islamic movement, and he thought that if we start creating Shia institutions, official institutions such as the council, this is going to create more sectarian divisions in the Islamic scene, and he didn't want that. But Sayyid Musa Sadr had a different idea. He said, well, as long as the Shia religious affairs are under the Sunni Mufti, they're not well represented, they're not well advocated for by the office of the Muftihood, and this is the system in which we are. We will work within. This is the sectarian system. Every confessional group has a religious body that represents it, but the Shia need this religious body. And Sheikh Muhammad Shamsuddin was close to Musa Sadr on these ideas. He did not necessarily want to be involved in it very closely, the way he didn't want to be involved in the Dawah party, but he approved of creating such a council because it was the way, the civil way, and the non-militant way, non-revolutionary way to be able to gain political rights and give more access and be able to push for more reforms in the Lebanese system through this council. And so after when Sayyid Musa Sadr managed to found the Islamic Shia Council, he asked Sheikh Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin to come and join him. The sources say that he was a bit reluctant, not because he disapproved of the idea, he approved of the idea very much, but because he wanted to focus on his intellectual output and on his writings. And he is a very prolific writer and produced so many books on different areas of ijtihad and Islamic law. But Sayyid Musa Sadr managed to convince him to come run for elections, and he was elected as the vice president of the Shia Council. And it was important for Musa Sadr to have Shamsuddin second in command, because Musa Sadr knew that he had many enemies, and many people wanted to get rid of him because of the activism and because of the project he wanted, because he wanted to reform the system, but he wanted to avoid at any cost to go into a civil war in Lebanon. And that was not the position of the leftist movement, not the position of their allies, the Palestinian forces who were in Lebanon, and not the position also of the Maronite right-wing establishment, who was also starting to launch its own militias. So it seemed there were many forces that were pushing for a civil war in Lebanon, and that let the more powerful one win. Musa Sadr was from the beginning very opposed to the civil war, and he was from the beginning warning against the Israeli threat in South Lebanon. And we know that there was an invasion in 1978, but the major invasion came in 1982, and he kind of expected this to happen, and he believed that in order to protect the Shia in Lebanon, in order to protect South Lebanon and keep the unity of this country, because the unity of this country will protect, that's the best order that can protect the Shia. We need to avoid at any cost a civil war. And I think his fears were in their place, because soon in 1978 he's going to be kidnapped in Libya by Gaddafi, and we never heard anything from him since then. And so afterward, Shamsuddin will be at the head of the Shia Islamic Council, and he will continue the project of Musa Sadr, but he is going to theorize it. This is something that Musa Sadr did not do. He was more active in political action. Shamsuddin was much more intellectual, and he was respected for his intellectual output very much in Lebanon. He was not the marja like Fadlallah, who was issuing very important legal opinions for the Shia society, but on a theoretical level, he was theorizing about what kind of government for Islam, to protect Islam, and what kind of system for Lebanon in this very dysfunctional, problematic sectarian system that was not able to protect Lebanon and let it drown in a very destructive civil war.
Fascinating. Again, just we could keep going on and on. It's perhaps we might even need a second episode to continue this discussion, because there is this ever-pervading tension between transnationalism and indigenous Shi'ism. Transnational Shi'ism, indigenous Shi'ism, and Mahdi Shamsuddin, Sheikh Mahdi wanted the Shia of Lebanon to live with their partners, with their co-religionists, from what I understand, in a peaceful way. Not only a peaceful way, in a way that the Shia of Lebanon secure their own religious identity, but not at the exclusion of others, right? And he was always kind of negotiating that line, I just find it very, very fascinating and an important contribution to a theory of developing, a religious identity. While it's not that he denied any kind of transnational Shia identity, clearly he didn't, but making do and negotiating with the situation that was put in front of him, which brings me to our concluding thoughts. I met Robert Fisk, the journalist, the famous journalist, just before COVID. And he gave a talk on Lebanese politics at the University of Toronto. I was in the front row, I remember, and I was like, I was so excited to hear him. And not only that, be in the front row to listen to Robert Fisk. After, and Robert Fisk, who was a journalist, I believe he was in Lebanon for some time, was bemoaning this notion of sectarian politics, this idea of, as I say in Arabic, كلهم على مصلحتهم. Everyone's on their own interests. Everyone's after their own interests, not the interests of Lebanon, not the interests of a united Lebanon, of a prospering Lebanon. They're either with Shia or with a particular group of Shia, Sunnah or with Sunnah, Christians are with Christians, and then within the Christians, they have their own disagreements. And you have this profoundly fractured society where people are, which doesn't give rise to a healthy kind of civic society where people can maintain their religious identity and kind of live among one another in a pluralistic society at the same time. That pluralism should not give rise to disorder, rather. Mm-hmm. And Fisk was bemoaning the whole situation, and in Lebanon, and basically saying, look, you need a civic government, and then let people kind of live their religious lives as they wish to. What would have Shamsuddin? How would have Shamsuddin thought about this? I was thinking about this, asking you this question. If he was listening to Robert Fisk, and he had an opportunity to engage with him on this issue, what do you think Shamsuddin would say about the current situation?
Shamsuddin would totally agree with Robert Fisk. He would tell him, these were my ideas.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Exactly how I look at this divisive sectarian system, that even though it did create some sort of freedom of speech in Lebanon, like no one is being persecuted. However, it is impossible to have a normal governance of the country with all these dividedness, and with these confessional groups vying against each other all the time and trying to snatch resources, state resources, political positions, governmental positions from the other confessional group, to the extent the country can sometimes be paralyzed, like it is now paralyzed. It wasn't that bad when Shamsuddin was still alive. So he would have said, I was warning against that from the beginning, and I've tried to work through the Islamic Shia Council, but also through my writings, my critique of Wilayat al-Faqih, my My theory is about the permissibility to work with the unjust governments, hukam in Islamic legal traditions, with the unjust governments, hukam al-jawr, or the unjust rulers. We can transfer this to modern times, and we can make it permissible for the Shia and for Muslims to cooperate with these governments and to reform them and to work to create more equality and less sectarian divisions. So the sectarian problem in Lebanon was a very big problem for Shamsuddin. And so I'll try to summarize his positions in three phases. So we talked about the first phase when he was collaborating with Musa Sadr. Musa Sadr was still present in Lebanon. At that time, he and Musa Sadr produced two important documents that were called ورقات المجلس الإسلامي الشيعي الأعلى, or the papers of the Islamic Council, in which they proposed a roadmap to reform the sectarian system. And this is in 1975, 1977, the beginning of the civil war in Lebanon, 1975. And so in this document, what they're doing is a compromise. And so they're telling the Lebanese government, with being dominated by these right-wing Christian leaders, and then the Sunni leaders, that look, we need to reform the system. On one hand, the Muslims, especially the Shia, are going to recognize Lebanon as the final homeland for its own citizens. الوطن النهائي لأبنائه. لبنان الوطن النهائي لأبنائه. The final homeland. So all these narratives and projects about dividing Lebanon, about unity with Syria, about a Christian federation, because during the beginning of the war they started talking about, this is not working, let's divide Lebanon into a Christian federation, a Muslim federation, all of that. This was going to threaten the unity of Lebanon and South Lebanon also. So on one hand, this debate about the legitimacy of Lebanon and whether the Lebanese state is viable or not needs to be ended. All Lebanese citizens, especially Muslim citizens and Shia citizens, are going to recognize the finality of the Lebanese state. In return, the Lebanese state needs to invest much more in the underdeveloped regions of the Shia, but also needs to give them more political power, more political representation, more benefits, more access to funding, more access to resources. And they go through this. It's a very, very important roadmap. That was the first position. Now, the second position, this is when Imam Musa Sadr is no longer present, and Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin is alone on top of the Islamic Shia Council, in the middle of a very destructive civil war that was aggravated and intensified, and the Israeli occupation had started. It was invaded. South Lebanon was invaded by the Israelis in 1982. A lot of destruction in South Lebanon. The lives of the Shia in South Lebanon are so endangered. They're engaging in a military resistance against the Israeli occupation. Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin supports it very much. This is when the Hezbollah resistance also starts. The communists are also resisting. Everybody is engaging in this resistance, and he is supportive of it. At the same time, we had Christian leaders in the Lebanese government who were collaborating with the Israelis. And for this is where Muhammad Mahdi Shamsuddin decided that we cannot do with this sectarian system. When it reaches this level, these right-wing Christians have always been demanding guarantees in Lebanon to protect themselves in a sea of Muslims in the Arab world. And so they believed that having a lot of power in Lebanon protected them. However, when it reaches the level where they are endangering the lives of others, and they're talking about they're dealing with the oppressors of the South Lebanese, this is when we need to get rid of this system. And this is when he proposed a more radical idea, a more radical proposition for a Lebanese system, and he called it majority-based consultative democracy. Majority-based means that Muslims have become majority here. The Shia and the Sunnis are the large majority. The Shia demographically have grown substantively. So this is where we need to make a whole reshuffling of power balances and give so much more powers to Muslims, to the extent that the presidency of the republic, that has always been the prerogative of a Maronite, this has to stop. A Muslim can run for election and be the president of Lebanon. So he was doing away with the sectarian system. That was the second phase, and this is that was in the mid-1980s, the worst time for Lebanon. A few
also
years
the Civil War at that time, right? The 80s. Right? This was also during the Civil War, right?
During the Civil War, where, yes, that was the worst phase of the Civil War. So battles everywhere, no governmental functioning at all. This will change with the end of the war in 1989, and the war ended with the agreement of all Lebanese factions to have consensus over the Ta'if agreement that was done in Saudi Arabia. So the Ta'if agreement proposed a new constitution for Lebanon. So there was constitutional change, and many of the provisions in the Ta'if agreement kind of resonated with the documents of the Islamic Council, what Musa Sadr and Shamsuddin had proposed. So it introduced a 50-50 representation in the parliament, 50-50 between Muslims and Christians. That was not the case before, and Shamsuddin and Musa Sadr wanted this, and other Muslim authorities wanted to push for this. But the powers of the Christian president were reduced, and much more powers were given to the prime minister and to the speaker of the house, so more powers to Muslims. I don't want to go into the details, but for Shamsuddin, it seemed like we're still dealing with a sectarian system that is divisive, but at least there are reforms that we have been calling for the last 10 years. They have been introduced, and at least it puts a roadmap for the Lebanese to work to reform the system even further to one day being able to reach a system that is not so sectarian, so not so divided through sectarian lines. And this is where his idea about civil government was he started to develop his idea about civil government, الدولة المدنية, instead of a sectarian system, but also instead of wilayat al-faqih.
Yeah.
So it came as
a third way. Yeah.
So it responded to all these concerns that he had been grappling with from the beginning, from his days in Iraq. The threats of secularization and communism and totally secularizing the state, and also the threats that come from wilayat al-faqih. So one of the concerns, maybe I didn't mention that, his main concern with wilayat al-faqih, it wasn't only because it threatens the loyalty of the Shia to their own states, but it also eradicates the multiple religious authority in the juristic Shia establishment. So with the supreme leader who has the concentration of all the powers in his hand, the supreme leader, the al-wali al-faqih, the guardian jurist, he has a concentration of all the powers. So he has the legislative power, the judiciary power, and the executive powers all in his hands. This is going to lead to unrestricted powers. And if he is at the head of a state, then he is going to eradicate the autonomy and the independence and the public and religious role of other jurists. So it is going to eradicate the multiple heads of the marja'iyya that the Najaf had, the Najaf establishment had. And so there's only one supreme jurist who is controlling all the other jurists. And these other jurists are going to lose their independence and their autonomy. And they're not going also they will not be able to pursue their role as interpreters of Islamic law, interpreting the legal sources of Islamic law and issuing legal opinions. So the legislative authority is in the hands of Wali al-Faqih, the supreme leader, and that eradicates any role left for the other jurists. And so this was a major problem that he had with Wilayat al-Faqih. And then the rise of Hezbollah, and Hezbollah often talking about maybe at the beginning establishing an Islamic government that professes its loyalty and allegiance to al-Wali al-Faqih in Iran and to Imam Khomeini. Or making the Shia subdued to an Iranian leadership. So in order to counter all these concerns, the secularization and the communism, and also the extreme thesis by the Christian leaders of Lebanon. So whenever things don't go their way, they start pushing for federations. Let's divide the country even further into a Christian federation. So all of these extremist theses, an Islamic government following Wilayat al-Faqih, a Christian federation, a totally secular government like the leftists want, that is going to totally eradicate the role of religion in public spaces. So encountering all of these concerns, he developed the idea of a civil government.
Yeah.
And so what is civil government? Civil government is a government that does not have religion. So there is a separation of religion and government, not religion and politics, but government. But this government, even though it does not have a religious identity, it protects religion in society and it gives it full freedom. It creates a free space for religion and for the Sharia to flourish and to express itself. And he often said that a government without religion does not mean citizens without religion. And he refers back to pre-modern Islamic societies in which he says that the political authority, the sultanate, the caliphate, whatever political authority was there, it is not this authority that protected Sharia. Actually, it is the Ummah, the Muslim communities, that protected Sharia by embracing it, and because Sharia lives within the Ummah. And in a modern context, the Sharia and Islam are going to live among people. And he used the word nas. He would use the word an-nas, people, but also historically, talking legally, al-Ummah. And so it's a government that allows a lot of freedom for religious expression. And this works very well, this arrangement of the civil government works very well with the Sharia, because Shamsuddin argued that there were two very important components of the Sharia. So the first one is fiqh al-afrad, the second one is al-fiqh al-am. So what is fiqh al-afrad? Fiqh al-afrad is Islamic law. So the part of Sharia that addresses the individual acts of worship, individual piety. And fiqh al-am is similar to constitutional law in a modern context. So it is the laws that address and deal with governmental functions or the economy, the defense, foreign relations. And Shamsuddin maintained that fiqh al-afrad, so the individual acts of worship and piety, they take supremacy over fiqh al-am. They represent the spirit of the Sharia. They are the core of the Sharia. And they are sacrosanct, they're immutable, they never change over time. And as long as Muslims are able to uphold them freely, to embrace them, then Sharia is protected and Islam is protected. Fiqh al-am can change over time. So we can leave these these are governmental functions. We can leave them to the administrative authorities that is there. And as long as fiqh al-afrad is prevalent and it's in a free society that is religious and where religious institutions are not interfered with by the state, the government does not infringe on them, does not try to restrict them, then as a Muslim jurist, he believed that the basic requirements of the Sharia have been met. The basic requirements of justice have been met. And the role of the jurist that would have been eradicated by a government of Wilayat al-Faqih will not be eradicated by in a civil government. So him as a jurist and other jurists, the diversity and the multiplicity of authorities that they have can flourish under a civil government. And so the role of the jurist is going to be protected. The pious citizens are going to be protected, and this would be a great alternative for the sectarian system in Lebanon, although this is not feasible in any way. But at least at the theoretical level, he proposed that.
Perfect. That's a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate having you on today, Dr. Kawtharani. That brings our discussion to a close. Do check us out on YouTube or on our website for other episodes of this of our podcasts. I thank our viewers for joining us today. And I certainly really benefited from this conversation, and I felt it was very timely as well. Thank you very much, Dr. Kawtharani, for coming on the show today. Thank you.